NYC Workforce Drop. I'm Greg Morris, the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Happy spring, everyone. I hope the sun is out where you are, whether you are folding your laundry, you're sweeping the stoop, you're out and about walking our beautiful parks, wherever it is, or at the local coffee shop with a notebook, with the papers. Do people still have newspapers? I don't know. But I hope wherever you are feeling a sense of the joy and rejuvenation that the spring does bring. So today's pod, I hope, relates to that feeling of renewal. I hope it relates to the feeling of change. I hope it relates to the idea of value and impact and the sun that shines on us when we put ourselves in a position to make communities better. Dr. Aldrin Bonilla is the Executive Vice President of the Fund for the City of New York. He is a true champion of New Yorkers. He is someone who cares deeply, deeply about Northern Manhattan, Washington Heights. He talks during this podcast about what it was like to grow up in New York City in the 70s and 80s and how that influenced his journey, both working and connecting to friends, how that connected to his neighborhood, how he took that and carried that forward to serve our city in a variety of amazing roles. Here's someone who is the commissioner and chair of the New York City Equal Employment Practices Commission. He served as Manhattan Deputy Borough President. He took an active role in focusing on the census in the past. And he has genuinely 25 plus years in a variety of government, nonprofit, academic leadership positions. What I most appreciate about him is that when he is in a room, when he talks to New Yorkers, when he connects on behalf of the Fund for the City of New York, he does that from a space of genuine appreciation for the people who do the work and the investments that we make together to do right and to do better. Welcome, Aldrin. It's great to see you.
Great to be here with you. Great to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. The reason that I brought you, or we reached out, was because the fund for the City of New York, put out the Overlooked and Undercounted in New York City 2026 brief. Now, the actual report is going to drop in full in May, right? This is the brief.
April.
Yeah. So we're coming. It's happening. It's happening. Yeah. Okay. And so I that was like a ruse, though, because I was like, we need to dig into this because it's critical. But I want to sit across from you because I am always appreciative of who you are and how you think and the way you work. And your career in New York City is extraordinarily expansive. You've touched lots of different places and things. And so I will dig into the brief. We'll talk about the upcoming report. But I also want to hear you share as much as you're comfortable about what you believe in, where you've been, and how you've been doing things. And I can't think about starting anywhere other than, and I'm quoting you because I was watching an old video of you, connected by umbilical cord to Washington Heights, Inwood, Northern Manhattan. Grew up in the 70s and 80s. That's the time period. Talk to me about when you think of the Heights, what do you think of first? What moves you the most?
Oh, man. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the invite. Always appreciate being around you. Glad we have this opportunity to chop it up. And in terms of the Washington Heights, Inwood, Northern Manhattan, for me, it was an amazing neighborhood to come of age, right? A lot happening at the time in the 70s, 80s, both the good, bad, and the ugly. I always say that New York City in 2025 had about 435 or so murders in 2025. And I always say that in 1988, the 34th precinct, which was the precinct in my neighborhood in Washington Heights, and then the precinct right south of us, the 30th, what at the time called the Dirty 30, together had over 400 murders. So it gives you the sense of the scale of violence of wanton, murders, and just at the same time, right, when you grappled with crack and drugs, and so I always say Washington Heights was, so close to the George Washington Bridge and so far from God, because it was like this. I remember as a child walking to school and just having a senseless parade of cars just pulling up next to me, wanting a business transaction, just coming off of the George Washington Bridge. So you get a sense of supply and demand very early as a 9-year-old, like what gets bought, what gets sold, and what's easy to buy and sell. So, that part of it is inescapable. At the same time, you had a whole group of community residents, of mothers who've lost their children, of community leaders, of faith-based leaders, of nonprofit leaders, who did a great deal of work in terms of keeping, to the extent that they could, the children under their care, the students under their supervision, the families that they supported and served, safe, nurtured, loved. And that was the nonprofit, web that kind of, I teetered on, right? So you teetered on, some of it streets and then some of it, structured programming. Initially, I was a latchkey kid, until a lot of these nonprofits were able to get their programming up and running through DYCD funding and others. And then I transitioned into more structural youth leadership programming and things of that sort. But Washington Heights is a place where I, did it all, right? From I know one of my mentors, Bruce Lincoln from Uptown La Crosse, would say that, that when I came to his youth program, the biggest thing he was trying to convince me of is stop jumping from roof to rooftop. We used to do that playing around, like as we would run, but all these street games, right, which unfortunately no longer around, kind of, right? Skittles, Kick the Can, the Man's Game, Ring Olivia, Johnny Ride the Pony, all these games, street games.
Right.
I have fond memories of.
That's how you were living. That's what.
Yeah.
That's what was taking up your time. You weren't on your phone. We didn't have that then.
No.
You were outside doing it. But let me just ask: how long could you be outside? Did the family want you to be home at a certain time?
Yeah. The thing is, I had to be home, kind of by 8 or 9, but there's always a fire escape. So I would just leave through the fire escape, go out, still hang out with friends, drop down the ladder from the first floor of the fire escape, unhook it, drop it down, make sure it stayed down, and then I would work my way back up home after a certain time. But I had working class parents, right? Factory workers, dad mechanic, mom seamstress, Broadway Lafayette. Thank God for those factory jobs that pay little, but it was something. And we're talking about parents who were gone at 6 in the morning, back at 8 in the evening. So you kind of figured things out yourself. Until, like I mentioned, this web of nonprofits and started meeting that need and structuring that time. But I had the benefit of having the unstructured, great risk-taking activities that helped me discover and be independent and fearless in many ways. And then I had that structured after school time when it was built out that gave me a sense of responsibility, a sense of remediation and the schoolwork that I was missing on, and a sense of leadership development and skills development. And in a way connected me to the opportunities of SYP and other opportunities that then allowed me to have a work identity, a student work identity that my family very much appreciated, because then I became at an early age a contributor to the household.
And did you? Now I'm just say I was a latchkey kid too.
So you know exactly that.
I know it.
The exhilaration of it.
The exhilaration of being what you have to figure out on your own.
Yeah.
You have family that's working, latchkey, and I don't know kids today. I don't even know how they think about this, but this is the idea of listen, it was my parents were working. I had to come home and do my thing. And to your point, there was a level of independence related to that. And there were plenty of us who did good things and not so good things with that level of freedom, too. But to the idea of what you built about trying to navigate your world, that's part of what that felt like, I think. And I had to be home by the time, when I used to play as a kid, I had to be home by the time the street lights were on.
Okay.
I grew up in upstate. There was no fire escape. I couldn't get out. I couldn't get.
But in the summer, that pushed you about 9 o'clock.
Yeah, that's right. That was my. That's exactly the way it was. Did your family say to you, we need you to find your way to these, I want to say nonprofit activities, after school activities. Did they encourage you to do that, or was it a situation where you need to do that, or you found them on your own?
Yeah, it was out of necessity, and like carrying adults around me. My parents were they were too busy working.
Yeah,
I mean, it was work for them. So that motivation came from like circumstance and like, but also a great deal of advice, guidance, and mentoring from caring adults around me.
Who were looking out for you, presumably.
And who then served a role as mentors within time.
And just to back up one more second on the GW, and the cars lining up. This is the era. People making their doing their buy and sell options right there. How did you and the people you ran with see that at the time? I mean, you referenced that as like, okay, you supply and demand, get it. But like if you were, and here's where this comes from for me. I didn't get to New York City until the 90s, right? So I look at old photos of the subway trains. I hear stories about the crack era. I don't know how to process that because I wasn't here then. That's how I always say. I grew up in upstate. I'll never really be a New Yorker, even though I've lived here for 30 plus years, longer than I grew up upstate, as my mother likes to remind me. So I'm wondering how it is, what was happening on GW. How did you think about what was going on, and how did you think about the city in the 70s and early 80s? These were not necessarily thought of as the glory years. Yeah. These are very challenged places, too, times and places.
That's a great question. I mean, I saw it as, you see, you roll with a group of friends, right, that you come of age with.
Yeah.
From class, from maybe, different leagues, sports to the extent that you're involved in that. And I saw the transformation in friends who it kind of clicked for them when they started making really a lot of money, more than their parents, at the age of like 12, 13, 14, 15, right? But I also saw that those decisions of how to make that money then kind of spurred, cascading decisions that I didn't kind of like want for me. In other words, then you would not, if you were bringing in a great deal of money, you were not trying to go to school. You were not trying to kind of like listen to anyone. You would, and school was still very much something I was interested in just being a part of because of like social aspects of it and just the structure I liked. And then slowly within time, you start seeing the level of violence and like devaluing of life and that your own friends have had to take, and me very much kind of being opposed to that, right? Of that violence in any sort. And it is violence, sometimes self-protection, because some set might have wanted to set it off on one of my friends, and then they had to retaliate, and then it escalates upwards. That, and the last one was a transaction cost. I learned very early on that, while the money was fast and it was good and it was a lot, it started seeming more readily temporary because of either death, incarceration, or just having to flee. So between transaction costs, kind of, the violence attached to it, and the decisions that folks were making in regards to leaving school and family and other things in order to pursue that lifestyle wasn't appealing to me. I was very much, I kind of knew, I didn't know the value of school, but I knew that it was set up for a reason and that I needed to be there, during certain hours. Right. I knew that I wanted not to dishonor the sacrifice of my parents who were like busting their ass like 12-hour days. And I knew that I didn't want to necessarily be part of anything kind of that hurt, maimed, or killed anyone. Kind of, I was like a
guardrails.
A guardrail. Like I was a threshold was the one. And then I was smart enough to know that the fast money, the lifestyle, the goods and clothing and things that were very much appealing to anyone of any background, of any class, wants good things. I realized that the transaction costs achieving and realizing and purchasing those good things was too high, based on what I learned later became kind of like a prison industrial complex, as well as a place where we were burying far too many of our young people.
That's right. I appreciate you sharing that part of the journey. I'm going to jump around because you've done amazing things and we have important content ground to cover. But I just want to start to say, for this segment of the pod here, true story. I was thinking about this. Where did I first meet you? And I know exactly where it was.
Oh, my goodness.
So now I am lucky enough in my career to have worked with some amazing people. Alfonso Wyatt.
Oh, my God. I remember the moment in a conference in 2022 where you dropped the mic and Alfonso got off his seat, went over to you and gave you this big hug.
I did not expect
you remember that?
I treasure that picture.
You remember that?
I did not expect that. I treasure that picture to no end.
Alfonso said, "Let me go hug my son."
He did that. That's what he said. That he said, "Well done, my son."
He did it in front of. He did it like in front of 300
I was literally
people.
like, "Oh, it was beautiful." It's a beautiful moment. So we've crossed. So crossing paths over the course of lifetime, seeing you, know people that you have tremendous relationships with as well. But if I have to draw it back to the moment I first met you. It was at when I know you were the deputy borough president for Gail Brewer, and you walked into the room. This is when we were doing community board. It was the community board recruitment info session, and it was. I know it because it was in person. This is before it all. It has now. It's all online and in person. And I remember you. It's a group of a lot of people.
100
people. It's a ridiculous number of people. And I at that time, I was applying for Community Board 8 in Manhattan. And I remember distinctly sitting in this room with all these people, because everybody, there's a lot of bodies in the room. And you walked in. And you were setting the sort of like, here's what this is. Here's how it works. And you very quickly moved us to, I want to see you working together. Because I think, if I recall correctly, what you talked about and thought about related to the value of community only came from how it is that people on boards and otherwise work with each other. Mm-hmm. And so instead of it being like this info session, it was more like roll up your sleeves. I got a project for you to do, and you're gonna work together on it. And then you were like, all the borough president people are watching you do it, and we're going to use that as a tool to get a sense of whether or not you're the right match for this moment. Mm-hmm. And I remember being like, I didn't know that was coming. I just didn't know that was coming. But it struck me right from that moment that being a member of the community board, which until you're part of the community board, you don't really understand the community board.
Correct.
Until that moment, I don't think I realized all of what it really meant to make a connection with my community. So I want to say thank you for being that warm, inviting presence in that particular moment. But I remember seeing you and be like, who's this guy? Because you had the room in the palm of your hand and you put us to work. What is that experience like from your perspective? What does it mean to be a community board member? And what does it mean to try to get people ready for the community board?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a moment of insanity. Right? let me give you some background on that. So
there it goes.
So I think it was January 2014, I want to say. I think. Yeah, January 2014, where we just became, Gail just took office as borough president. I became deputy borough president. She appointed me deputy borough president. Mm-hmm. And the idea was we want to do something different with community boards, right? Mm-hmm. The narrative then, actually very much as it is now somewhat, is that the community board was somewhat an old boys network to a certain extent, certain unrepresentative of the districts in which
very
they represent,
unrepresentative.
skewed in certain ways that were troubling, kind of became a place of kind of NIMBYism or just the in-group. So the idea was, that we needed to do something differently, like shake things up a bit, to diversify it, bring in new voices and stuff. So within 2-3 weeks, I figured out how to put the application online. The first borough in New York City, 2014, 2013, to put the community board application online. That allowed me to then have a lot of data metric points and like use and pivot the data in a variety of different ways. And the idea was that we wanted to bring in this new era of civic engagement, which meant that a lot more people than usual applied. That year, about 1,045 or so people applied right off the bat. For only, conceivably, if we got rid of everyone who was on the board and reappointed everyone and nothing, conceivably maybe only 300 slots. But and there was no way we were going to get rid of people who kind of were great board members and had institutional knowledge and had the experience and were doing well. But how do we get to those folks that can easily transition in? When they all kind of did exemplar on essays, like what do you, and they all did, So we came up with this idea that I had done in higher education in another setting where I wanted to see how people showed up in terms of collective decision making or in group exercise or activities. And I wanted to do so in 3 ways. One in which Manhattanites are the most cosmopolitan, brilliant, most intelligent, entitled people in the world.
They definitely think that about themselves. That's exact. Shout out to Manhattanites everywhere.
So I'm like, how do we do this kind of differently so people could show up not just about like their accolades and all their degrees and all their titles and positions, but kind of like even the playing field. So one of the scenarios was where people crashed in a snow-capped mountain in a helicopter, which I was pretty much sure that not a lot of people in Manhattan had experienced that before.
There's probably one or two.
There's
always somebody in Manhattan who's been like, I did that.
Or there's people that say, I'm an expert on this. So the idea was that, they all was in a scenario that they were all uncomfortable with. There was a great deal of uncertainty, ambiguity, and that the really only way to get out of it was to work together and ranking salvageable items in terms of survival. And what I demonstrated, and this was done iteratively every like 3 hours for like 7 days until we were able to reach like about 1,000 people with this kind of group exercise. And invariably, working togetger, people achieved optimal decision making and what they had noticed, what they had decided on their own was needed for survival. So it was a very powerful. And every conclusion of that was a very powerful message to the board members that if done right and if the conditions of engagement and community were in place, the sum will be greater than its parts. That decision making will be optimized. It would be improved by people's experiences, backgrounds, ideas, suggestions, recommendations. And the few times when it didn't occur, I demonstrated that it didn't occur because often sometimes that person with the right information that could have kind of led to a right outcome was silent, not engaged, not included, felt disrespected in some way by someone occupying more of the oxygen in the room. And I kind of use that to really show that community boards are an amazing experiment in local civic democratic governance. And if done right and if conditions were supported and board members trained, at least the community could feel that the processes were legitimate, democratic representative, and that the outcomes, even to the extent they were disagreed on, were optimal decision making, for the community's benefit. And then the second one was then transitioning to a land use where there was no expert to parachute in as to where a school could be built, or a homeless shelter, or an ambulance depot for emergency services. And they're realizing, wow, whereas the first scenario, we had a survivalist come in and say, this is how it's ranked. When you deal with those kind of problems of where something is going to be built, when, how, and for whom, those are adaptive challenges. The current information you have is not going to get you to a solution because no one could parachute and say, you know what, the only thing that could actually be built here is affordable housing. Because you have people that will disagree. Or it's going to be a homeless shelter. That's right. And then after that, we really, the staff of the borough president's office, as well as a lot of independent reviewers, kind of were just taking notes on this person in the smaller group was very thoughtful. They were welcoming. They were analytical. They were someone who thought very creatively. They were storytellers. And then with that data point in terms of how people worked in groups and the data points about how they answered these, essay questions. And then when it was time to appoint community boards, we had a whole rich treasure trove of other type of data points as to how is this community board in regards to renters versus owners, and is that reflective of the how is it in regards to parents versus non-parents of the board, how is it in regards to African Americans, Latinos, LGBTQ, young people ages 16 to 20, and then based on that we try to kind of make our appointments to the extent possible, reflective of the community based on the opportunity set of the vacancies that were available. Because we didn't necessarily want to take out really great board members either. So that
because you don't turn the whole board over at any given time. There's member spots open. Now there are term limits as well.
Yeah,
which
correct.
did not exist, I think,
which we
before.
disagreed with, actually.
Is that
at
right?
the time. Yeah. We felt that, term limits are the actual appointing body. You want to get new voices in it, then have the courage, the political will, and the conviction to just bring that new blood in. By definition, your charter already empowers you to do so. So community boards with the term limits are the only bodies, I think, where you're giving of your labor for free, you're giving up your expertise for free, and after 8 years where you actually know what you're doing against developers and city agencies and others, then then they say, okay, c'est la vie.
Yeah.
Like, it disadvantages the community boards over time.
It's a fascinating space to be in. I feel very grateful during the course of my life in New York City to have found my way to community board engagement, that idea of how you figure things out, how you work with others, how it is that you deal with different personalities, different skill sets, all critical to be able to address what are both the most micro issues. Literally, if you're on the on the licensing group, it's literally like beverage license. The distance between the curb and where the outdoor dining has to be precise. Hyperlocal. Yeah. And then the flip side is these are bodies that can also weigh in on bigger matters, whether it's related to the city budget or whether it's related to what's going on in the country. I mean,
One of the moments there was the MTA came in. They were so happy that they were making so many different train stations ADA accessible, and then they were discussing this one station in Harlem which hadn't been ADA accessible because they felt there was certain structural prohibitions. And then this one community board member said, "What about that entrance that was sealed 30 years ago when that development went up on the corner of so and so? Why can't you make it?" And they were like, "What? What entrance?" That kind of knowledge is just priceless.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And it's that type of knowledge from my perspective which is so fantastic. And also, when folks demonstrate that type of knowledge, it can also feel isolating because if you're someone who doesn't know that history, you have to have a very special dynamic within that community board space. So folks go, "Well, I don't know that, but explain to me why. And I don't understand how, but what is that? Or I don't have that history." I don't want to feel like an outsider either.
The folks often say now, and they say too often, I think they really don't understand the crux of it in terms of those at the crux or facing, the problems or the equity disparities are the ones with the solution, or those, closest to the ground, will have the solution. Not if the conditions are not in place.
That's right.
There has to be trust. There has to be respect. There has to be reciprocity. There has to be team building, collective decision making. All these things, have to be appropriate problem framing in order for people to feel like that what they're going to say and the time they're going to give and the contributions they're going to make are going to be valued.
That's exactly right. And I was just say, all those different skill sets that one might be able to build in settings like that, to me, how you build community, how you engage, how you think about data, how you respond to it, who has the history, who has the creativity, who's the storyteller. To be honest, those are the types of things that, if I understand the reports that I've read, that's what the workforce wants. That's what employers want.
Yeah,
they want folks who can do all of those and have all of those things.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to practice that in a quasi-governmental space as well. You've referenced data a couple times, and then we're going to get into the report. But I just want to note this. Our dear friend, Maria Lizardo, the executive director at NIMIC. The incomparable. She's been on this podcast. Amazing. Broke the record for most bleeps in terms of language, which we love for Maria. We're going to take Chris Quinn is coming on the pod, so it's going to be we're going to test it out and see.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one.
That's going to be a tough one. Here's what she said. She gave me a couple of things.
They were sailors in another life.
Yeah, I adore them. A special place in my heart for Maria, always and everywhere. She was giving me a little bit of insight on you and things to sort of talk to you about, but this was my favorite of what she wrote today, because she was she's representing NIMIC, Northern Manhattan, so history in Washington Heights, and so this is what she said. She wanted us to talk about the census at some point. And I want to dig into that. I want to go to the report.
Love that
then we'll do the census.
Love that part.
And then we're going to wind this thing up on the fund. But I also want to talk about the Valley.
All right.
I got to do that.
Actually, let's do the census before the report.
Do the census before. Okay, do the census before. But so this is a perfect transition. This is what Maria said. I was like, describe Aldrin. He's quite a geek, she wrote. He loves data. OMG. Sometimes he talks and only he understands himself. And then she made a smiley face emoji at the end of that. What is this compulsion? What is this desire? What is this part of you, whether, and again, just rewinding the clock here, you've been talking about open data to solve problems. You were in the census conversation, in which case I heard you a number of times mention 1790. Washington was engaged in the census conversation. What is the obsession with you and I mean that in the best way, with data?
Yeah, great question. If I had to reflect on that quickly, I would just say that I think in undergrad, right, in the doctoral program, my first doctoral program.
And we should acknowledge right now, I'm sitting with a doctor.
Yes, Dr. Aldrin Bonilla. But if my daughter were saying it, she uses air quotes.
Oh.
Yeah, my daughter uses air quotes.
Come on.
Because if I can't help her with a fever or an ear infection or a sore
if someone
throat,
falls down or hurts,
what
kind of doctor are you?
But my obsession with data really came because early on I wanted in my scholarly or intellectual curiosity, I was interested always in issues of justice, equality, equity, fairness. And at the time, we're talking about decades ago, a lot of the canon in political science in particular, kind of if you couldn't measure it, it didn't matter. So a lot of what I cared about in terms of uplifting people from poverty and making sure people were dealt fairly and fighting against discrimination, unless I had data points, it didn't matter. People didn't want to listen.
That's right.
So then I made it my business to really uplift data that can show the circumstances of people, not in a way to blame them or to even let them feel that, well, my lot of life is actually of my own doing, but to show how what they're going through and how they're living is an aggregation and systemically connected to so many other aspects of their life in terms of opportunity measured in numbers. Then when I started really delving into data, I started seeing how disparities, gaps, and inequities always fell and skewed in one direction. It wasn't like this notion that, you were having like really good health outcomes, but just the job market was not going your way. Well, the job market wasn't going your way, and the health indicators were going great, but education was not going your way. And then I really started saying, wow, this is kind of like, systemic,
That's right.
Interconnected. It really, and then as a result, I decided.
Let me ask a question. I just want to pause for a second to say, and I was told in the podcast I should never interrupt, but I'm just going to 1 second on this to say, just so we talk about systems for a second. The systems were built to serve the people they were built to serve. Sometimes we get into the thing where it's like the systems are broken. It's how you interpret that.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's working.
And I just want to pause. It's working really good for those people who, in all those categories and all those buckets, are doing real well, right? Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to note that because I know that you are thoughtful about that, insightful about that, and I think you also see that as something that we sometimes get caught up in the idea of like, oh, it's a broken system. No. Remember, it was built to serve in a certain way, and I just want to pause on that.
Absolutely. So a line that I always remember is Jemani Williams one time saying that if our founding fathers would land here and come back today, except for a few little things here and there, they would say, wow, this is working pretty well.
Wow, this worked out great.
This worked out great. Absolutely right. So data for me is really just as that leverage point, right, in terms of the advocacy and the pursuits of kind of like the themes that I'm interested in around justice, around equality, around equity. Then realizing that data alone just reveals, showcases, illustrates, points out, but it's not the solution. Actually, it's just like that. It doesn't even get you into the ballpark. In terms of understanding the stakeholders, in terms of understanding the intensity of where people stand, where they sit, they stand. In terms of understanding like how to shift and move behavioral and attitudinal and practices. That's really the more adaptive challenges. That the technical skills that I acquired and that I developed and cared for in terms of data analysis, mapping, data analytics, storytelling, is just the beginning. That really understanding the adaptive challenges of why we're not moving the needle and the behavioral and attitudinal work that needs to be done. That's kind of like what I get the real, joy of now doing in terms of, so data is just really a tool, a vehicle, a leverage point, like something, a tool in an arsenal, a variety of different tools to help advocate for and uplift communities that I deeply care about.
It's an interesting moment to talk about data because today is the day that I think we're releasing we have an updated press release going out today that's about the New York City Employment and Training Coalition's efforts to work with its membership on benchmarking. Workforce development benchmarking, workforce network benchmarking.
Ooh, that sounds yummy.
And we do that. I know you love that.
That sounds really good.
I know.
That's sexy.
And we do that in partnership with the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, and they got support from JPMC, JP Morgan Chase, to support the work. And shout out to Lori Dean at Pinkerton, who's always been very focused on this benchmarking piece as well, which is really about trying to tell the story. Actually, to back it up, it's really a matter of saying, how are we doing in our programs? And not using that as a critical conversation, but rather using it as a beginning stage of a learning conversation. How do I relate to your program? How does who I serve, what are the right dosages over time that are resulting in the best outcomes? How does that relate to what's happening in another state? And how do they do it? And what do we learn from that? And I mention it because in my history, as someone who's had responsibility for reporting on things and looking at data and the desire to understand metrics, I'm always struck by the number of organizations and entities and people I've been connected to who either because of interest, time, resource, platform, haven't made the commitment in the way that maybe you have to deep diving into what these numbers mean and how it is that these numbers impact community. Sometimes that's about the difficulty I think people have between talking about qualitative versus quantitative, judgments of things. But I'm curious from your perspective, is there a value, and how do you think the value of data collection, data
Absolutely.
Performance management relates to storytelling, and how does that fit?
Absolutely. The benchmarking idea, I think, it's right on, spot on, and I'll tell you why. I recently completed reviewing about 500 different applications for a statewide grant program.
The Lucha program. Lucha, right?
Yeah, which congratulations.
Thank you very much. That's my MSCT.
So, for example, when in that program, they had different buckets. In the workforce development bucket, for example, and this was the case in all the other three buckets, the proposed programming and the design and interventions and the dosage and the type of interventions, and then the cost per participant, and then the kind of output and outcomes desired were all over the map. Was that all over the map?
Yep.
And to me,
that's workforce development right there.
To me,
there's your problem.
That is part of the problem, right? Because it lets me know that kind of folks haven't been zeroing in necessarily on best practices around design, around dosage or implementation or scale or scope, and then that affects in terms of the outputs and the outcomes in relation to cost per participant.
That's right.
And as a result, number one, we're not dutifully leveraging the resources in the best optimal way based on what we know works and is true across the board as a sector. And number two, it really kind of has some folks recreating the wheel in various ways in ways they don't need to, because there's a proof of concept and already a proven framework and proven outcomes in a particular regard. And then number three, it allows people who are funding this to kind of, unfortunately and unnecessarily, in my opinion, be suspicious or think that they can not fund in the way in which the sector tells it to fund, but in the way they want to fund it, because they're all over the place anyway, and they'll do it at whatever price we tell them to do it, because they're telling us the bands of the prices that they're telling us we don't find credible, and that's a problem, because then it's the funders dictating to the sector how you should do it, at what price, and for what outcome, when it should be the other way around.
That's right.
Considering the work you're doing around these benchmarks and all that is going to be incredibly useful to inform our discussion.
I appreciate that, and it is going to be a challenge, and I'm so grateful to all the different organizations that have participated in benchmarking. There is a history in New York City of workforce development trying to think about that. It's been hard to do because inevitably it results in some people interpreting the data one way, and there are winners and losers sometimes in that case, and I've always sort of come at this from the perspective of how do we know how well we're doing? How can we really tell the story of how impactful that is? And if those things are out of alignment or we're not able to champion that, then how can we prioritize what our value is? And speaking of priorities, I have to talk about the census because you had your hands in a specific census effort that resulted, if I understand correctly, wouldn't Washington Heights have the best census participation numbers?
I ran the Northern Manhattan Census Operation 2000.
Talk about that because return on investment is significant here.
Phenomenal. I mean, that census operation, right, delivered such a complete and accurate count that it led to dozens of schools opening based on the new population counts. Great deal of more federal funding and a congressional seat. That kind of shifted from Harlem to Northern Manhattan because that's where the growth was identified the most. But what's interesting is that I approached leading that office kind of like as a workforce development, higher education thing. Right here, I kind of I was in a doctoral program for about 8 years. I had to come back home because my parents were like, "We are not of economic means and whatever for you to be fancy footing around this stuff. You've been there so long. You keep telling me it's not for law or medical, so what the hell are you doing? Come back home, contribute to the household building." So I had to come back home. Took the test to lead the thing. It was the census test was like one of those post office exams. Failed it the first time. Second time said, well, however I answered it the first time, let me answer it the opposite
way.
Then nailed it. And then became director of the whole census operation in Northern Manhattan. Had to hire 600 people. For, not having coming out of graduate school, not having had that supervisory manager experience.
And you're jumping right in.
Necessarily jumping in. Hiring all these people was amazing because I was hiring people who were unemployed, underemployed, or seasonally employed at incomes and wages that they've never seen prior to that, and possibly many hadn't seen subsequent years after that. So I was hiring all these people. $30 an hour or even more. Phenomenal.
Amazing.
Yeah, in 2000. Imagine.
Right, like that.
Exactly. It was transformative, changing their lives.
I was going to say, people fighting for that number now.
It was changing their lives.
Right.
So I couched it in the sense of, look, I did a lot of training, a lot of anchoring in history. I mentioned 1790 in terms of the first census, but I made it really, I didn't sugarcoat it, right? I gave them the whole history of the census from 3/5, who was responsible for counting 3/5 of enslaved African-American human beings in the it was the Census Bureau. How, in terms of using the census for internment camps during the war and manipulating that, I gave them the rawness, even to the chagrin of the Census Bureau, like I did, because I felt that if I gave them the truth and I gave them the full scope of this enterprise, short of going to war, the most thing that this country does as a collective is counting each other to a census every 10 years. So that's the largest scale, common cause type thing that we can all get our things around. Then I talked about how it could lead to more money to your community, greater representation at the federal, state, and local level, how it determines in terms of how many children are counted. Gave the whole shebang. And it worked. I mean, people went and enumerated and counted and knocked on doors, kind of like as a civic calling. Like they put their lineage directly back like 200 and something years and felt like this was like a really amazing thing I'm doing, not only for myself making money, but for the community. What I also found was that, I had to go beyond that because these folks like me were temporary. We were only going to be doing this for about a year. So how do you let folks know that you're doing this for a year, but that like $100, $1,000, $200 you're making every 2 weeks or whatever is not gonna like last after this.
That's right.
That house you just brought might have not been a good decision. The car, all the money you're spending in
because you're living good now, but what happens next?
So I overlaid financial literacy into it.
Nice.
I overlaid in terms of credit. I overlaid in terms of people wanting to buy property. I overlaid all these different things to a federal job, to a federal census job. I made it about history. I made it about civic engagement. I made it about justice. I made it about inequality. I made it about addressing, what our community needed, about representation, and then I made it about themselves. Addition to that, then how are these different things you're doing in the community, knocking on doors? Is knocking on doors just knocking on doors to ask them, but are you building trust? Is this something like service, how you speak to people? How do you translate that into your resume? And what kind of other jobs out there kind of pivot in terms of what you were doing? Whether you were the ones that were part of my group with 60 people that were cutting checks for the other 500 and something and making sure that they had all that was human resource. Whether you were the ones that were recruiting the people to take the test and help and communicate, that's higher education related in terms of assessments. Although you may not have the degree, you may not, but now you're doing things already that can translate and are transferable in resumes, and I'll try to help you in that regard. Long story short, we were the number one. We had the highest male response rate in all of New York State and New York City, because we're in the highest, and we had the least amount of opportunities to go out and knock on doors to get that kind of non-response enumeration, which is kind of not the most accurate data. The most accurate data is what people say about themselves. Right? So as a result, we had one of the most accurate and complete counts. Amazing. There was still an undercount, because we're still, but it shocked New York City, shocked the state.
Shocked New York City because Washington Heights was not thought to be
working class, immigrant, Spanish speaking, Dominican mostly, and we outbested Upper West Side, we outbested Long Island City, we outbested Park Slope. It was incredible. The attention we got, the team, rather than it be a year, a lot of the team went out and helped Miami, which was having problems. We sent them out to Trenton, New Jersey. So folks was like, what were you doing? What's the special sauce? The special sauce was just really, like I said, doubling down on people in terms of like the enterprise that they're doing, just not counting people. I put it in the larger narrative. In terms of this new money that you're making and this thing, what can you do for your children, your families, and yourself to parlay that into? And I think that was a really a good segue from that to the Fund for the City of New York, which saw my work, and then from the Fund for the City of New York to CUNY in the Heights. Which CUNY in the Heights was just a census for me, which is just a way that now I take these same people that worked with me 5 years earlier, making a lot of money. What have they been doing in the interim period? And is there a demand and a constituency in Northern Manhattan for workforce development industry credentialing for GED and for other things? Because now you have people with experience but without the degree and without the credentials, and then it becomes more difficult. So I tried, CUNY in the Heights was like this way for me to say, look, you've gotten a lot of the experience. Washington Heights is some place with economic vitality, immigrant creativity, a lot of out of school.
Dominican power.
Dominican power, a lot of overage, undercredited. So what kind of resources can I bring in a higher education setting? So that to make sure you get the credentials, get the workforce credentials, get the degrees, get the GED, get the kind of things you need to then be able to go into the workforce, and then added a kind of career, cradle to career, so that it slowly opened up on Saturdays and Sundays for young people, doing everything from Mandarin to robotics to everything in it you could think of. So the idea was, while the dad was learning either food prep, certification or something around taxi or occupational English, and the mom was taking something like medical billing and coding or certified nursing assistant primarily, and then the child can be then taking Mandarin or doing work in math or robotics. So they could be like a family affair. And it was very much like a continuation of the work I had done in the census, which is weird because the census is federal government. It should just be a workplace. What do you mean you made it into like a workforce development? What do you mean you made it into like an educational thing? What do you mean you made it into like a personal development type thing? But that's exactly what I did with the census. And then the CUNY in the Heights allowed me to, in the same geographic region, draw down, double down, and go deeper on kind of like meeting the needs of those constituencies to prepare them for the workforce, and particularly for occupations in demand that were I want to say good wages, but in demand is not always good wages. As
that's right. No, wages is very difficult.
That's always a problem, and I will speak about that later. But really, kind of, it allowed me to, in a very hyper local way, move the needle on education, on workforce, on job opportunities, and on family sustainability at the end of the day.
And that seems to me to be quite a pivot now to your time now at the Fund for the City of New York. And this brief, Overlooked and Undercounted in New York City 2026, based on the Fund for the City of New York's work on the true cost of living benchmark.
Yes.
This is the updated brief. There'll be a full report that's going to come out, as you said earlier, in April. This is about why income adequacy matters in New York City. We talk about affordability a lot in New York City. That's become a where economic mobility pops up. Your thoughts about how it is that you have committed and your colleagues have thought about how to lift a community up. You know, it's not like it's one part. It's multi-generational. There's educational aspects. There's workforce aspects. There's the social aspects that have to be supported. But brass tacks, we're in a moment where just the headline, 46% of working age New York City households fall below the true cost of living. So the starting point is to say, what is it that you want folks to know about this brief? Because it's in, you know, the full report's going to come out. Again, what do you want the takeaway to be? And then I think the follow-up is going to be, you know, if this is the greatest city in the world, what has to change?